Well, I think there's three things you want to look at. You want to look at the scale of a military, you want to look at strategic capabilities, and you want to look at power projection. So scale, you just need to be a certain size. If you're a tiny country, you can't have a military that's a superpower. So it's the size of the forces and having an army, a navy, an air force, and maybe a rocket force. And China certainly meets that criteria. I think the second metric is strategic capabilities. And classically, we've thought about this as nuclear capabilities, but I think in the modern world, you're looking at other things as well. Space and counterspace capabilities, cyber capabilities, and a defense industry that's capable of producing sophisticated weapons. And in those areas, China has been lagging, but has been putting a lot of resources into it and is making significant progress. They're a very capable cyber power. They're building up their space capabilities, although they're still behind the United States and Russia. They have a small nuclear arsenal, but they're modernizing it and going to sea with it as well. So in strategic capabilities, I think they're not quite there yet, but they're catching up. And the third is power projection. That's really the thing that distinguishes a superpower, is you can go somewhere else and have your military do something. And that's an area where China is pretty far behind. Within Asia, they can project a certain amount of power. They have their first aircraft carrier, which helps with that. But if you look outside the Asia region to the Indian Ocean or the Middle East, they're not really able to project a significant amount of power in a contested environment. So it's one thing to go to the Gulf of Aden and protect against pirates, but it's a completely different thing to go there and be prepared to fight with another military or to deploy a significant amount of forces and support them in combat operations. China's not there yet, and it will take, in my view, at least a decade or more to get that kind of capability. Well, I think certainly their military, the PLA, has ambitions of benchmarking itself against the best. And I think that means developing the types of capabilities that the United States has or that Russia has. So in that sense, I think there is the ambition to have a military that's capable of doing this. But I also think China doesn't want the responsibilities that the United States and the Soviet Union took on to try to be the guarantor of order around the world. That's a very taxing burden, to be the one who has to deploy troops to the Middle East to deal with proliferation or to stop a civil war. It's a very expensive thing to do. It can bog you down in combat operations that you don't necessarily want to do. And I think Chinese leaders have been very careful to avoid those kinds of commitments. So they want the capabilities, but not the responsibility to do it. And I don't think that's going to change for quite some time to come. The only thing I can really imagine changing that would be the energy issue. China imports a lot of its oil and gas from the Middle East, and instability there really could have a very significant negative effect on their economy. And if the U.S. is no longer willing to play that role at some point in the future, that's the circumstance I can see China thinking, well, we have to do something to keep our economy going. There's mostly regional, but some global. I think within the region, China has a number of sovereignty disputes with countries, a land border dispute with India, the question of Taiwan, and maritime disputes in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And they see a role for the military in helping to defend those interests and perhaps potentially to resolve those conflicts. So I think most of the interests that China might use military force for are within the region. That said, I think with China's growing global economic presence, you're seeing new interests that come up. So one of those is the flow of energy, but other kinds of natural resources. China is an export giant, and those exports mostly travel by sea. So I think there's an interest in protecting sea lines of communication, and in particular, if U.S.-China rivalry heats up, right now the PLA Navy is not capable of protecting those sea lanes against a determined effort to cut them. So that's an area where I think they see the need for more military capability. And the other is that you have Chinese citizens and investments all over the world. And when there's instability in Libya, increasingly the PLA is being asked and expected to go do something about it. So in that case, they deployed both aircraft and a few ships to try to help evacuate Chinese citizens from Libya. That's a mission that I think you'll see more of in the future. Well, I think the nuclear area is one where they've lagged. Some of the sophisticated space systems are an area where they've lagged. The quality of their Air Force and Navy weapons have not been quite up to U.S. standards, nor do they have the training to really conduct joint operations where you're using the ground, air, and naval forces all together in a synergistic way. And they recognize that. They're undertaking a very ambitious set of military reforms, and one of the goals is really to improve their capability to conduct joint operations, to have all the parts of the military work together in behalf of a common campaign. It's something they really don't have that capability now, and the reforms are intended to provide that. If I look at where they are catching up, their Air Force and Navy used to be way, way behind state-of-the-art standards. Now they have some pretty capable weapon systems and are starting to be able to use them. They used to have very poor intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. They've made a huge investment in that, and that's important so you know where an adversary is. They used to not have precision weapons. They've made a huge investment across all their services in building ballistic missiles that are very accurate, building cruise missiles that are very accurate, and improving the Air Force's ability to conduct precision strike missions. That's an area where they've caught up quite a lot. I think the other would be electronic warfare, where in some areas they're probably ahead of the United States in the sophistication of their systems. One area where you could also say China is ahead of the United States is in conventional ballistic missiles. That's an area where the U.S. hasn't made that investment. We have some treaty constraints with the INF treaty that we signed with the Soviet Union that means we don't have some of those missiles of certain ranges. But this is an area where China made the decision that they could invest in this capability and make them accurate enough to be militarily useful systems, and they were right, and they've done it. So I think that's an area where in that particular type of missiles they do have an advantage because the U.S. just doesn't have some of those systems.